Hello, this is Franco Cabral broadcasting from the Honest Liar podcast, a conversation around finding the inner liar within all of us and leveraging the truth to create expansion across all areas of your life. Today's topic is, why am I even doing this? This is a question I've been thinking about a lot recently as it came up to the launch of this podcast, and it actually was something that I thought at a much deeper level this past week, from the first launch of the first episode to this episode. And I started thinking about, where did this concept even come up for me or thought of launching this podcast? At the end of 2018 in December, I was at a warrior event doing a guided meditation, and I heard what for me is I called the voice at the time. Others in my coaching program call it God, and at the time, for me, all I could really associate was the voice with something within me, and it was my inner self is what I thought. Since then, my conversation around God and spirituality has definitely evolved, and I know that it was God speaking to me at that time, but something came to me saying, it's time to broadcast, and I didn't even know why that was something that came to my heart, but I knew it was there. So I wrote it down as a target this year that I wanted to launch into this podcast and share a message. I didn't even know quite really what the message was that I wanted to share, but I knew one thing was that I wanted to leave a legacy of lessons for my kids. The thought of death was something that has been coming up for me a lot from a place of productive, not necessarily morbidness, and just recognizing, what am I leaving behind? And I can leave money, I can leave assets, I can leave real estate, I can leave my business. And yes, those are things that are important to me to leave behind for my kids. But there's nothing more valuable than having lessons that I can share with my kids long beyond when I'm gone or when, God decides it's my last day. So that's where the podcast really, for me, started to connect that I got to do this. I got to start doing something that I can leave behind for my kids. But at the end of the day, that's really not a deep enough message for me as to why it is that I'm doing this, because I could always leave messages for my kids or communicate to them. I didn't necessarily have to broadcast something so publicly. So as I thought about it, I realized that it all came back for me to one of the biggest lies that I was telling myself before I started this process at Warrior Week. And it was a question that was posed to me. It was actually, what is the biggest lie that I'm telling myself? At that time, I was telling myself that I'm okay. And it sounds crazy to me now, thinking back, that I said that I was okay, knowing that I was at the darkest point in my life. Nothing was really working for me at all at that time. I was completely fucking lost. I felt empty inside, and I never felt more alone in my life. So as I reflected on this past week, I realized that another reason, additional to my kids, why I'm doing this is really to own my own darkness. And I used to run, hide, and sedate from my darkness. And through this process, I am sharing my darkness. I am going to a very vulnerable place throughout this experience, and it's been difficult, but it's also been liberating, and it's given me the opportunity to really own my darkness. And what I mean by owning my darkness is that I just accepted that I was where I was, and I continue to lean into accepting that I am where I am. And I'm no longer playing the game of perfection, which is a game that I played for most of my life. Now I play the game of today is where I'm at, and I'm honest with where I am, and because I recognize the power that comes from being able to be honest and looking at myself in the mirror and truly just owning my darkness. Most of us, myself included, especially when I started this process, I was focusing on the light that I was seeking. I knew that I wanted to have a more successful business. I knew that I wasn't happy with what I looked at in the mirror when I saw myself. I was the most critical. Other people would tell me, "Hey, you look good. You're fit." And the reality is, I hated taking off my clothes and looking at myself in the mirror. I knew that I was disconnected with my wife and the relationship wasn't what I wanted. I knew how I felt, but I couldn't even face myself to tell myself the truth and really own my darkness. And I recognized that in this process, I can't ever get the light that I'm looking for if I'm not willing to stand in my darkness. And I was grateful, and I'm grateful that I had the right coaching, tools, systems at a time where I desperately needed some light. I was taught how to find my own light in the darkness. The first step of that, though, is having the courage to truly just stand in the dark and be okay with the darkness that was in my life and leverage that darkness to find the light. So in this podcast, I'm going to share and leave a legacy for my children as to how they're going to be able to turn their own light switch on in the darkness. But on a deeper level, God has continued to communicate this message of why are you doing this? And I heard the voice of God twice this week, and I know that might sound crazy, the voice or God or the voice of God or wherever you stand spiritually. And this podcast is really meant for it to connect with anybody, regardless of where you are spiritually, understanding that when I started this process, I was in a place where I couldn't really even utter the word God out loud because I didn't believe in God. And I was so disconnected from myself that I couldn't hear my own voice clearly. So yes, fast forward 2 years later, I'm able to talk about the voice, and it's something that I'm just not talking about, but I energetically feel within me. This past week, my brother asked me the same question. Why are you doing this? And I recognized that I gave him somewhat of a superficial answer. It was, my children and leaving a legacy. And yes, like I just mentioned earlier, that is part of my reason. But there's something much deeper inside me that has been really pushing me to push past some big fears. This podcast is something that scares the shit out of me. To this moment, I start the podcast and I feel anxiety. I feel a rush. I feel fear. And I also recognize that I've chased a lot of my fears, and what comes on the other side of fear is power. When I'm willing to stand and lean into my fear, immense amount of power comes out at the other end. So that is also one of the reasons why I'm doing this, because I recognize that the man that I will become by going through this process is better than the man that stands and delivers this message today. I have a burning desire in my heart to share light. And that is the message of this podcast. I'm going to walk through tools and systems and share stories throughout the process of how I figured out how to turn on the light within my darkness, with my intention being that I am looking to show others, and my burning desire is to share how to turn on your own light. And the first step is really how to own your darkness, because so many of us, myself included, are sedated to the idea that we're in the dark. We aren't honest with ourselves and actually looking in the mirror and being true to the facts that exist in our life. Not the feelings. We all have feelings, and those are typically easier to focus on, but the facts just stand by themselves. The facts are the facts. And sometimes the facts are beautiful, and sometimes the facts are really fucking painful, as they were for me. In the most painful facts were the places that I found the greatest light. So I'm also going to be sharing how I was able to identify my facts, own my facts, and then leverage those facts to find the light that I was seeking. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share this message with you and to guide myself through the process of even owning my darkness at a deeper level. So I thank you for the opportunity to share. And what I do ask is, of this message, if you're getting any light for yourself or anything that's coming to you of value, my message and my desire is to share this message with as many people as this can impact. So please take the time to share this with somebody else in your life that you love, that you think this message would resonate with. As I continue to post, I'm also going to ask, if you're getting something of value from this, take the time to comment. Take the time to rate and review in the different channels that I'll be posting, because that helps me in my mission of sharing this light and this ability to own our darkness. Thank you very much, and have a great day. To look forward to talking to you next week on the Honest Liar Podcast.